Well, welcome everybody to the latest edition of Ed Talks, our podcast. And it couldn't be more apposite, really, that I'm talking to Vanessa Warwick, founder of Property Tribes and well-known commentator on the property rental sector. Really, seriously, guys, if you want any information on what's going on in the world of PRS, go to propertytribes.com. It's just got everything that you might need to know on there. But more importantly, Vanessa has a big social media profile and is a well-known face. In fact, I think it's after we finish this off, she's being brave enough to go up to the Conservative Party conference to talk about being a landlord. So I don't really know where to start, Vanessa. So why don't you?
I don't know, Ed. It's incredible times. It's a brilliant time, as you said, to have a catch up because, well, if we wanted to talk about what had happened between now and our last catch up, which was, I don't know, over a year ago, I guess. Well, actually, no, let's talk about what's happened in the last 2 weeks. There's enough there to fill an entire webinar.
Let's do that, because that's what I think listeners really want to hear.
Well, I've been a landlord since 1992, and I've been a portfolio landlord since 2004. And I'm very, very well known for, keeping the faith with buy-to-let through, whatever headwinds landlords experience. And boy, have we experienced some over, I would say, the last 5 or 6 years, including onerous taxation, increasing legislation and regulation, Brexit, we've got the Section 24 tax, as I mentioned, we've got had the COVID-19 pandemic, and more recently and ongoing the Ukraine-Russian war. So all of those things have really created challenges for landlords, but I've kept the faith. But for the first time, I'm starting to feel that buy-to-let is becoming unviable. What's happened in the last couple of weeks has really sent shockwaves throughout the landlord community. It feels like a buy-to-let roller coaster, and I'm seriously thinking about jumping off.
So what is it about the last 2 weeks? If I was going to try and characterize what's created the difficulty here, they've sort of, as of this morning, the new regime seems to have withdrawn the tax rise, but the biggest issue had been this 45 to 40% tax reduction, which the markets had taken in bad faith, with the result that the pound had fallen. The only way that the Bank of England was going to react to that was to put up interest rates, or threaten to put up interest rates. The net result was that loads of lenders took thousands of products off the market and have now put them back on again at much higher rates. And the government have now reversed that tax cut. So it may not have been that necessary anyway. So if you put that chaos to one side for a moment, is it those interest rate rises or mortgage rate rises or funding rises for buy-to-let landlords that have made has that been the final nail for you?
It's one of them. I think obviously there's the energy crisis, which is causing great consternation to landlords and indeed, of course, tenants. But I think for me, the mini budget was a chance to do something really different and really commit to something. And that's what I was hoping for. And unfortunately, it was just a complete unmitigated disaster. So now we've got, Miss Truss has found this magic money tree, which Theresa May could never find, to prop up households during the energy crisis. So more government spending of, unprecedented proportions. It's even more than what was spent on furlough during COVID. And then you're combining that, with massive inflation, which is only going to go up because of government spending, and tax cuts, which means that the public purse might diminish. There was a moment in time to do something to make it feel like a conservative government again, and to stop the rot in the private rented sector. One of the things that I would have liked to see is the standard rate tax threshold being raised. So that would take more landlords who are in investing in a personal name. It would take them out of the Section 24 tax regime, and that could in turn help increase supply in the sector, because we are seeing unprecedented demand but diminishing supply. And rents are going up. People can't get on the housing ladder because of these interest rate rises. It's like a perfect storm. And I've said this before. I thought we've had a perfect storm before, but this one, I'm calling it Hurricane Truss. It's just an unmitigated disaster on so many levels.
Well, there's a lot of hyperbole there. I mean, unprecedented, etc. And I'm not disagreeing that there is an awful lot at play here at the moment. And you and I have spoken in the past, both off screen and on screen, about the dangers of reducing the private rented sector too much and of being seen to try and be on the side of first time buyers, etc., etc. And I think that has all been proved to have been, well, if not a mistake, then certainly ill-advised. I mean, the problem surely at the moment is trying to get more people back into the sector. And I don't necessarily subscribe to the idea that things are just going to get worse and worse and worse. We've both been around long enough, pardon my French, to have seen things go up and down. We know that you get these awful moments in particularly in financial history, where you get a sort of this is not even a black swan event, it's sort of us stabbing ourselves or shooting ourselves in the foot, it seems to me. But anyway, don't forget, as a backdrop, you have got lots of places in the world have inflation, lots of places have falling value against the dollar because the dollar is strong, lots of places have energy crisis, lots of places have interest rates going up. It's not only endemic here in the UK. And I think the backdrop to a lot of that may well change. Who knows what's going to happen with Putin? Who knows what's going to happen with the Ukraine war? An awful lot of this does stem, certainly the inflation stuff post-COVID-19 comes from problems with that. So I don't necessarily subscribe to the fact that this is going to go on and on and on and on. I do think it's going to we may have 6 months or so. And I'm fascinated with I'm not fascinated, but I agree with this thing about there being ridiculous amounts of money pumped into the energy issue. I mean, it's just to support the UK households for 6 months. It's going to cost about as much as it costs to run the NHS for a year. It's absolutely enormous sums of money, 120 billion pounds, just huge amounts of money. But if one assumes for a second that is sort of going to not go away, but inflation's going to drop out, prices don't continue to go up. If we look at the fact that interest rates, because of what the government have done today and back down on the 45 pence thing, the pound, the dollar's already back, or the dollar's dropped a little bit against sterling. It's back up to 112, 115. Seems like it's going a little bit back in our direction. If all that happens, do you think it's gone too far for people like you? Are you now, even if that all changed and went back to something approaching where we were 2 or 3 weeks ago, have you had enough of that? Is that something which you're just going to back away from, being a landlord?
Well, no, because property is a long-term investment and it doesn't benefit from short-term thinking or knee-jerk reactions. And this is the value of discussions like this, the discussions that we've been having on property tribes. There are scores of them. If you do get into a very emotionally charged state, like I was when all of this kicked off, you go and you read other people's opinions, and then you're able to apply your own critical thinking to them, and they help you formulate a way forwards. So that's what I'm doing. It's an ongoing process. I'm not going to make any knee-jerk reactions. I've got 2 remortgages going through to get off SVRs, which are financially crippling. They should go through in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
What do you think? Let's just talk about that for a second. What do you think those are going to change from to, if you just talk about the interest rates?
Well, who knows? Some people are saying going up to 6%. I really don't know, but I do know that the writing was on the wall that rates were going to go up because they've been historically low, and people should have been prepared for this.
Well, that's an incredibly good point, Vanessa, you make, that of course people have got used to these ridiculously low interest rates, which are not normal. So we have got a generation of people who think that 0.5% interest rates are normal and 2% 5-year fixes are normal. And I read on Property Tribes this morning, you put a piece up there about rates going to 6%, and that's a lot less than, well, not a lot less, but it is less, it's more, pardon me, than the yields you get on most properties. Let's just talk about that for a second. So if you look at your portfolio, for instance, at the moment, where would you say your yields are, and where should buy-to-let landlords expect to be able to get a yield at the moment? What sort of yield would they expect to get?
Well, it's such a tricky question, Ed, because as you know, the UK is just a series of micro markets, and everybody has a different circumstance and personal situation, and what they want to achieve from buy to let. And that's one of the things that I love about it. You can tailor it to whatever it is you're trying to achieve. So if you've got very significant other income, you're not really going to be bothered if you're in it for the very long term for capital growth, if your properties are just breaking even. Right now, traditional buy-to-let is challenging, London more so. You know, you should really be looking at about a minimum 5% yield. But as you know, I have a couple of holiday lets. They don't have to adhere to all the rules and regulations of buy-to-let. They're not affected by Section 24 tax regime. And they've done extremely well this year. And I've already got bookings coming in for the rest of the year. So, you know, if I was going to start investing now, or if I was going to go back into buying mode now, I would probably buy another coastal holiday let, because, you know, you say we've had you know, a whole generation of people that are used to these very low interest rates. Well, you're right. We've had a whole generation of landlords that have only been investing with these parameters. And, you know, if some of them have remained on SVRs, that they are going to get a very, very nasty shock. And a lot of landlords who are very highly leveraged, or you know, poor yields, poor quality properties, I fear they are going to get wiped out by this. We've already got people on Property Tribe saying that it's the end of the road for them, and they're looking to sell up really quickly or take a hit or whatever. So it does depend on your personal position. My view is I take a lesson from sailing, because my husband and I, big sailors, and when you go into a storm in a sailing boat, one of the best things you can do is perform a maneuver called heave to, and that is where you set the sails so that your boat just rests on the water. It's not moving forwards or backwards, it's just static on the water, and you can ride out any storm pretty much as a heave to. And if you remember back to the Fastnet race in the 70s, most of the boats that heaved to survived the storm. Those that tried to run to the ports were destroyed by the storm. So I shall be heaving to with my portfolio. I shall be reading property commentary. I shall be steering well clear of the mainstream media. I think, you know, they talk down and create such clickbait headlines, you know, that they will influence people that don't apply critical thinking. So I will continue on. I'm not going anywhere yet. I shall heave to and keep my powder dry and see what happens over the next few
Well, I think
weeks.
it's very good advice that about not reading too much into, or not reading the mainstream media and believing everything they say, because things change day to day. And for those who may not be hugely experienced buy-to-let landlords, I mean, when Vanessa was talking about 5%, we're talking about gross yields there. And of course, the thing about holiday lets is that you do get a much higher yield, but they're much more intensive to manage. You tend to get people coming and going every week, so there are sheets to change, etc., etc. So
Yeah, but you
but
can have that all done, you know, by a firm, which
absolutely.
I have fully managed. And I think one of the great things about holiday lets is that it's guests, it's not tenants. So you don't have a lot of the hassles that can arise if you have a delinquent tenant, because a guest has no right of tenure at all.
And I suppose that coastal or the acquisition of coastal properties is now being threatened by the fact that an awful lot of coastal owning or coastal councils are trying to keep landlords and outside second homeowners away from their properties, and trying to keep them within the price range of locals who want to live and work in their local communities, which has always struck me as being a very difficult thing to manage.
Yeah, well, it's understandable in Cornwall, which is where that kind of is happening. I don't have holiday lets in Cornwall. Mine are on the south coast. And actually holiday lets provide vital input to the local community. They bring people into the area to spend money in restaurants and bars and at attractions and things like that. They provide jobs for cleaners and maintenance men and so on. So that they're not all bad, but like any property investment, you do have to research where you're going to invest. And interestingly, one of these properties that I am remortgaging is a coastal holiday let, and I wanted to get it valued at 275k for remortgaging purposes, and the value has come back at 325k. So I've had a 50,000 up valuation, which is very, very surprising indeed in these current times, because there is talk of buyers repricing now, suddenly saying, actually, I'm going to reduce my offer. There's talk of valuers down valuing now because of the fears about the economy and the way the market's going to go. So you can find a bright space in every downturn, but you've just got to keep your eyes open.
But I guess the up value there is precisely because it is a holiday let and it has a good market. I wonder whether that would be the same if it wasn't such a. I mean, as you say, the general trend at the moment isn't for up valuing, but I guess where you've got properties that would make a good investment for people. I mean, the holiday let scene, I agree, is a great. It's a great way to both invest without the concerns or the sometimes I think somewhat onerous legislation that goes with the rest of the PRS, and holiday lets have always escaped that. But coming back to one thing you just said there about remortgaging and refurbishing, I mean, certainly when I was one of the team running Douglas and Gordon, we had thousands of properties under management, and we always used to advise people that the main reason for owning a let, and admittedly we were in London where yields were always a bit less, is to pay for the maintenance of the property, really. So in other words, you get your income, but you don't keep it and go and spend it. You tend to keep upgrading the property, and particularly these days when you can't get the allowances against wear and tear and all this sort of stuff, you're going to have to be spending money on the property constantly to keep it in good condition. Would you say that's still valid, that people need to be, I mean, you mentioned long term, for most people they need to go into it with their eyes open, don't they?
Well, 100% you need to maintain your asset. If you let your asset decrease, then you're less likely to attract a tenant, or you may attract a tenant at a lower rent. I mean, it's absolutely vital to keep your properties up to standard, and to do regular facelifts. I have a whole rolling program for mine where they get like a minor facelift every 5 years, and then a major facelift every sort of 8 or 9 years. It's just, it's just so important. And things like boilers, you need to check them. We've got the EPC issue looming on the horizon. If you are going to upgrade your boiler, now would be the time to upgrade it to an A+ rated boiler to future-proof your property.
Just explain the EPC thing, because it's the first time really the EPCs have started to impinge on the potential value of properties. So just explain quickly what that is.
Well, it really has, and it's a very trending topic on Property Tribes. But basically, it's not set in statute yet, but there are moves afoot by the government that come 2025 it is now, but it keeps being pushed back. If you have a property with an EPC rating of C or less, you will not be able to let it. So the portals will start to reject properties if they're not a C and above rating when the time comes. And this is, put a lot of landlords into a spin, particularly with old Victorian stock that is typically quite difficult to upgrade the
typically
energy.
E, isn't it? I mean, that's, so they've got a lot of work to do to get to a B.
Yeah. Yeah, well, they have. So, there's lots of talk about this on the forums, landlords regarding it as a very serious threat. I think they're saying the average upgrade is between £10,000 and £13,000. So a lot of landlords have been remortgaging anyway to get access to cash to do these upgrades. Yeah. But again, it's in the future. It's not set in stone. It's very hard for people and landlords who are running a business, let's face it, to plan if they don't really know what's going on. And now, we've had this rental reform white paper just before, a few weeks before the mini budget, which set out all of these new rules and regulations that the government wants to bring in. And now, of course, that's kind of been sidelined by all this turmoil. The architect of it, Eddie Hughes, that resigned from his housing minister position. We don't know if a new housing minister is going to take up the cause. Again, landlords just left in limbo, which kind of leads me back to, you know, my analogy of heaving to in sailing. You can't make any plans if you can't tell which way the wind is blowing.
No, well, I think that's very good advice. I think the heave to analogy is a very good one, that people just need to sort of tread water for a little bit. I mean, some people can't because they're having to remortgage, or their deals are coming to an end, and the deals, I mean, I suspect that I do get the impression that this storm will pass a little bit. I mean, I sit on the industry forum for the TPA, so we get a lot of we've had a lot of input into the white paper and or the reform white paper, and or we've certainly listened to some of it, and it's sad that a lot of that, which could have been some of it could have been quite useful. It's a shame that that's being sidelined for the time being and pushed back even further. Look, at the end of the day, I think there's you've given a huge amount of really salient information in what you've said, and I think a lot of people will listen, and I really hope they listen to it. I'm well aware that an awful lot of people listen to what we're doing because they tend to listen to this on their commute, on their earphones. So they're probably going to be arriving home shortly. So what I'd love to finish on is, and you don't have to tell me if you don't want to, because you don't, and actually, to be fair, this won't come out until probably after your speech at the Conservative, or your section at the Conservative Party conference. But what are you going to tell them, Vanessa?
Well, my session is a panel debate on how to make the private rented sector better for both tenants and landlords. And also on the panel are representatives from Generation Rent, and I think there's an MP on there, and there's somebody from the local government association as well, and also my friend and colleague Ben Beadle, who is CEO of the NRLA. Basically, what I hope to get across is to stop all this anti-landlord rhetoric in the media, and all this landlord bashing that is just relentless. You know, landlords, the vast majority of them are decent people trying to provide good standards of accommodation. It's only the rogues, and I say rogues, maybe criminal is a better word for the type of landlords I refer to. It's those landlords and also rogue tenants that spoil it for the majority. There's a lot of laws to enforce landlord regulation in place, but they are not utilized by the local authorities. So it's no good piling on more and more legislation and regulation when what is already there is not being enforced. All that's going to happen is that the good landlords are going to get tired because their costs are much more adhering to all of this compliance, and they're going to leave. Meanwhile, the rogue landlords just fly under the radar, carry on regardless, putting 13 people in a 2-bedroomed house, don't think anything of it. So I'm really going to fight to stop anti-landlord rhetoric, understand the demographic of the typical landlord in the UK, and I really want to stop this them and us. We're all in the private rented sector together. Good landlords and good tenants working together, they're going to have a really positive experience of the sector. And that's really what I want to promote. And I do believe, Ed, that it is the informed and educated landlord who is going to survive all the challenges that we've been talking about on this call. And I would certainly say to any of your listeners who are letting agents to maybe put on some landlord education events and get landlords talking, even if you do it online, and start helping landlords see their way through all of this. Very good way to retain clients and to provide a community service, which is going to help ultimately everybody, because well-informed landlords mean that their tenants have a better experience of private renting, in my opinion.
Yeah, and we forget that the vast majority do have a good experience. It's just the bad ones that get the headlines again.
Yeah, exactly.
We all read the newspapers and read our websites and whatever else it is. But it's a shame that no one ever turns around and says, yes, you've done a really good job. All you ever hear about is the people that get it wrong. So good luck with that.
Thank you, Ed. I'll just quickly tell you, I had the Times call me, and the journalist said, this was about 5 weeks ago, the journalist said, oh yes, I'd like to get some comments from you about landlords really putting up rates and really, you know, pushing rents up. And I said, sorry, with respect, it's not landlords pushing rents up, it is the market. The market dictates what the rent will be for any property in any given area. If you try and overinflate the rent, it's unlikely that you'll get many applicants. If you set the rent at the correct level, you will get a good selection of applicants. But landlords do not determine rents. It is the market that determines rent. And because there's such a limited supply of rental properties at the moment, you've got more and more tenants going for each property that becomes available. And I can tell you that I've got a 1-bed flat in N5 in North London that came up for rent recently, and I had 107 applications in 48 hours and 17 viewings. Now, I just put that rent on at the same rent that the outgoing tenant had, and I had 4 offers over that asking rent because they were so keen to get the property. So, you know, it is the market that determines rent, not landlords.
Well, that's a very good example. And again, one can't, one needs to understand that the press are looking for headlines and looking for people to come and click on their links. And so there is an element of that. But I really hope, thank you. I mean, I really hope that people will listen to this. We're certainly going to give it a very good push. I really hope the Tory party is listening and that your panel gets the airtime it deserves. I think Ben's a really good advocate for the smaller landlord, and you know, Property Tribes, the National Residential Landlords Association, well worth a visit as well. And I really hope people will listen to this. And you know, if I get any feedback from this and questions, I'll put them through to you. And I know you do an awful lot. There's a lot of other stuff you've got going on at the moment. I know it's not just this. We all have our lives, but this is a particular bit of our lives which is very affected by what's going on at the moment. So thank you so much for taking the time out to talk. And I look forward to promoting this and hearing what people think. Thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Ed. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, and thank you for everything that you do for our sector. I think Viewber is absolutely awesome service. I've used it myself actually to great effect, and my Viewber was absolutely lovely and really helped me out with a minor issue that I had with a property that was 200 miles away. So all the good guys are going to stick together, and we are going to have a voice, hopefully, and let's hope that people listen, because it's really important going forwards for the health of our sector that they do.